One day I read a book that discussed the traits and names of Jinn. The title was The World of the Jinn. At the end of the book, there was a peculiar note that read, "And now, dear reader, if you wish to learn more about the world of the Jinn, all you have to do is read this sentence." The sentence was strange, written in what seemed to be an unknown language, almost like some sort of incantation. At first I hesitated, unsure if I should read the bizarre sentence. Eventually, my curiosity won, and I decided to read it. I wish I hadn't. I read it because I wanted to know more about their world and satisfy my curiosity. The moment I finished reading the sentence, the electricity in my house suddenly went out. At first, I was terrified, but then I calmed myself, thinking it might just be a power outage. I grabbed my phone and started calling out in the house, but no one answered. Could everyone be asleep? Impossible. It was only 8 p.m. As I was lost in thought, the electricity came back on. I rushed to check on everyone, running to their rooms, but found no one there. Could they have all left the house without telling me? Impossible. But where could they be? I ran to the window to see if they were in the garden, and that's when I froze. I couldn't take a step forward, nor could I blink. Was what I was seeing real? Why was there blood dripping from them? Who had killed my family? They were all seated in chairs around the garden table, but they were lifeless, without heads. Their severed heads were placed on the table in front of their bodies. Would they kill me next? Would my life end the same way? No, I didn't want to die yet. I was still young. Panicking, I ran to my room and locked the door. I was so overwhelmed with fear that I couldn't even cry for my family, whom I had just lost. I grabbed my phone to call the police and report what had happened. Suddenly, I heard a terrifying voice behind me saying, "You are the one who caused your family's death. This is the price you paid for delving into our world. Welcome." I froze in place. My limbs went numb, my body chilled, and the hairs on my skin stood on end. I stood there motionless for nearly 10 minutes. Then, summoning all my courage, I turned around, but there was no one there. I felt a slight sense of relief, and finally called the police to report my family's murder. Within 10 minutes, the police arrived at my house and were horrified by the scene in the garden. Despite my mental state, they took me to the station for questioning. The officer began interrogating me, asking where I was during the time of the crime. I told him I had been studying for exams in my room since it was the final exam period. Despite my attempts to clear my name, they weren't convinced by anything I said. How could my entire family be killed without me noticing? And why was I the only one left alive? Suspicion loomed over me, but with no evidence linking me to the crime, they had no choice but to release me. That was the beginning of my journey into the world of the Jinn. The next day, my uncle Abdullah hosted the mourning ceremony for my family. However, only a few people attended to pay their respects. This was understandable, as rumors were circulating that my house was haunted and that Jinn were responsible for my family murder. To ease my burden, my uncle offered for me to stay with him at his house. Naturally, I refused. I didn't want him involved in this matter, nor did I want him or his family to suffer the same fate as mine. My uncle didn't press the issue, respecting my feelings and not wanting to add to my sorrow. Instead, he simply covered my education expenses. The 3 days of mourning passed quickly, and life in the house returned to its empty, eerie state. The only one who stayed with me was the young servant my uncle had sent to help around the house. At midnight, feeling exhausted, I headed to bed. I desperately needed sleep, as I hadn't rested in 3 days. How could I, knowing I was the cause of my family's death? I finally gave in to sleep, but within seconds, I heard a whisper close to my ear. "Why are you sad? Didn't you wish for your family to disappear so you connect with us better? We granted your wish. At first I was terrified and unable to move due to the overwhelming fear. But as the voice faded, so did my fear. Instead, a wide, sinister smile spread across my face, a smile of both joy and malice. Yes, I had always secretly wished for my family to vanish, and now my wish had come true. Why should I feel sadness? Sleep left me entirely. I opened my computer and searched for the second volume of the book to order it online. It was impossible to find such a book in local bookstores. After over an hour of searching, I finally found it. I was ecstatic to read the book. My mind was consumed with thoughts about the kind of information it would contain this time. Would it reveal more secrets about the Jinn and their world? Or would it offer ways to communicate with the other side? 5 days later, the book arrived at my house. I grabbed it and rushed to the basement, the safest place to hide the book in case the police suddenly searched the house. After all, the case was still unsolved. I opened the book and quickly skimmed through its pages. That's when I encountered the shock. This book was completely different from the first volume. Its text was incomprehensible, even though it was written in Arabic. Alongside the strange symbols drawn on the book's pages, I returned to the book's introduction to read what was written there. This is a rare edition, one of the few copies of this book, and I have made it especially for the person who deserves it. Yes, you, the one reading this book now. You will notice that this book is radically different from the previous volume. But don't worry. The strange words and symbols you see here are meant to teach you how to communicate with the Jinn and enter their world. In short, this book will teach you magic. I didn't finish reading the introduction because it was long and somewhat boring. However, the important thing was that I understood the book's content and purpose. As I read and flipped through its pages, a strange symbol caught my attention. It was a large star encircled by 2 rings, with a crescent moon drawn in the center of the star. Though the symbol seemed ordinary, I was inexplicably drawn to it. Without realizing it, I grabbed a piece of chalk and started drawing the circle on the basement floor. I gathered all the tools mentioned in the book. Just as I was about to begin the ritual, I heard the servant approaching. I quickly hid everything and erased the drawing. When he entered, I asked what he wanted. He replied, "Dinner is ready." I glared at him with a look of disdain, feeling as though his interruption had ruined my plans. Then, smirking maliciously, I returned to the basement. The servant seemed terrified, as though my gaze alone had struck fear into his heart. Amused by his reaction, I laughed hysterically at the thought of him being so frightened. I decided to postpone the ritual until the following day. The next day after school, I hurried home, so eager that I didn't even change out of my uniform. I went straight to the basement, locked the door, and opened the old iron box where I kept my books about the Jinn. I pulled out the book and decided to start from the beginning instead of focusing on the star symbol. I discovered the method to read the book. The explanations were in Arabic, while the strange symbols were incantations and spells. At the start of the book, there was a detailed explanation of how to establish a connection with the world of the Jinn and communicate with them. As much as I longed to speak with them rather than just read about them, I prepared for the ritual and began reciting the strange incantations. While I was reading, I noticed the light bulb flickering, dimming and then brightening again. The objects on the ground started to move as if an earthquake was shaking them, but the floor remained steady. The moment I finished reading the incantations, The bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Strange sounds began to echo around me. Children laughing, someone crying, and most terrifying of all, the scream of a woman. I was frozen in fear, but somehow I forced myself to stay calm. I felt as though something was approaching me. How could there be someone in the basement when I was certain the house was empty, except for the servant, who I had seen earlier tending to the garden? I heard footsteps drawing closer. My terror paralyzed me, making it impossible to move. What was going to happen? Was this figure going to kill me as they had killed my family? I wanted to flee, to escape the basement, but my body wouldn't respond. The presence drew closer. I could hear its breathing now. It placed its head on my shoulder. I didn't have the courage to turn and look, but I could feel its long hair brushing against my skin. Was it a woman? In a soft, chilling whisper, it spoke into my ear. As I told you before, welcome to our world. Do not fear us. Complete the book's rituals if you wish to live. How could she tell me not to be afraid when her very presence filled me with dread? Here's something you should know about me. I'm a coward. But at the same time, my curiosity is relentless. Deep down, I had known there was a high chance something like this would happen. Yet, I had chosen to proceed. My curiosity had brought me here, and now I was in too deep to turn back. But I couldn't suppress my curiosity. I was terrified of that woman and the ominous words she had spoken. Could it really be true that I would die if I didn't complete all the rituals? I was foolish. Why had I delved so deeply into their world? Wasn't the death of my family enough? What would happen to me after I finished the book? Would I die too? Oh God, help me. Save me from this mess. But why would I call upon my Lord after I disobeyed him and turned to witchcraft and sorcery? Am I insane? I know these practices will lead me straight to hell, yet I can't seem to stop myself. In the end, I decided I would complete all the rituals in the book. But this time, I planned to make the servant come with me to the basement. Still, he would inevitably inform my uncle, even if I didn't tell him what was going on. It was only a matter of time before my secret was out. I needed to get rid of him quickly before he exposed me. Yes, I had to eliminate him. That evening, I gathered all my books and threw them in the trash, except for that book. I kept it in my room. Then I returned to the basement to ensure I had disposed of every book related to the Jinn. When I opened the box, I was stunned. All the books I had just thrown away were back in the box. How did they return? I was certain I had gotten rid of them just moments ago. Who brought them back? Who knows my secret? Could it be the servant? No, impossible. If he knew, he would have already informed my uncle. And how could he have returned them so quickly? Was it them? Was this a warning? But wait. I was the one who wanted to contact them and speak with them in the first place. So why was I scared now? Fine, I would continue reading the book and see the results. Surely they wouldn't be that bad. Suddenly, as I was lost in thought, the girl appeared again. This time, she was standing at a distance in the corner of the room. Her thick hair covered her face, making it impossible for me to see her features clearly. Her stance was unsettling and sent shivers down my spine. She spoke in a chilling tone. The result won't be bad. You just need to complete the rituals. Then she let out a loud, terrifying laugh before disappearing again. I rushed out of the basement and back to my room, only to hear screaming coming from the house. It was the servant's voice. I ran toward the sound and found the kitchen engulfed in flames. The servant and I dashed outside together. Thankfully, I had my phone with me and immediately called the fire department. It didn't take long for the firefighters, police, and paramedics to arrive. The police questioned the servant about the cause of the fire. He replied, I don't know. I was heading to the kitchen to grab a snack, and the moment I stepped inside, it caught fire. It just burned. I don't know exactly why. After 2 hours, the situation was under control, and we returned to the house. Thank God the fire had been small. And until now, the servant had no idea what caused the fire. But I was certain it was my fault, a prelude to something greater. I headed to my room, anxious and frightened of what the future might hold. I lay down on my bed, exhausted, and immediately fell asleep. However, mere minutes later, I was jolted awake by the violent shaking of my bed. It was trembling forcefully, accompanied by those strange sounds again, the laughter of children and the scream of a woman. I couldn't discern the source, but after 2 minutes, everything stopped and the room returned to normal. I rested my head on the pillow once more, hoping to sleep. This time, nothing happened, and I woke up early in the morning. At 6:30 a.m., I made my way back to the basement, clutching the book in my hands. I opened it to proceed with the second ritual, but what I read shocked me. It was utterly revolting. The instructions demanded that I not bathe for 2 weeks, avoid cutting my hair or nails, and most importantly, isolate myself from everyone during that period. Disgusted, I returned home and decided to prepare myself. I showered, trimmed my nails, and took care of everything since I wouldn't be able to do so for 2 whole weeks. Then I went to the servant and instructed him not to contact me for 2 weeks and not to bring me any food. The servant was puzzled by my request at first, but he eventually accepted it. I stocked up on some food and water in my room and locked myself in. My room, fortunately, had a bathroom, making it the ideal place to confine myself. Those 2 weeks were a living nightmare, filled with terrifying and strange occurrences. It felt like hell on earth, but thank God I survived. Once the period ended, I reopened the cursed book to find the next ritual. What I saw this time infuriated me. It required that I never bathe or cut my hair. What? Was this some kind of joke? I'm not that filthy. 2 weeks was already unbearable. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the bathroom, determined to shower, ignoring all the previous warnings and events. But as soon as I took off my shirt, I heard strange, loud noises. I rushed out of the bathroom to check on my room and was met with a horrifying sight. All the furniture was destroyed and the room was in complete disarray. I mustered my courage and returned to the bathroom. I didn't care what might happen. I had had enough. I showered, cut my hair, and trimmed my nails. Once I finished everything, I stepped out of the room. But what was going on? The entire house was in chaos. All the furniture was destroyed. I ran around the house like a madman, trying to make sense of what had happened. Finally, I went outside to the garden, where I found the servant sitting on the ground, trembling with fear. I approached him and gently took his hand to calm him down. As soon as I touched him, he threw his arms around me and started sobbing. It was the first time I had seen him in such a state since he began working for me. I patted his head in an attempt to comfort him. I couldn't blame him. After all, he was just a young boy, barely 15 years old. I waited until he calmed down a bit before asking him what had happened. He responded in a shaky voice, "I don't know what happened, I swear. I didn't break anything." After finishing the cleaning, I sat in the living room to rest for a bit. Suddenly, the objects started flying and crashing to the ground on their own. Even some things that hadn't moved were breaking where they were. And there were voices. I heard screaming, terrifying screaming. I don't know where it came from. Smiling faintly, I reassured him, "Don't worry. I promise this will be the last time you see or hear anything like this." I will narrate my story from my perspective as a servant. My name is Sultan, and I am 15 years old. I worked in Mr. Mohammed's house. The house was strange and frightening from the very beginning, especially after the mysterious murder of his family, a case that the police could not solve, leading to its closure. I started working there on his uncle's orders, and despite my hesitation, I accepted the job. From the first day, I would hear strange and eerie sounds inside the house. I tried to ignore them so as not to worry Mr. Mohammed. But what worried me the most was Mr. Mohammed himself. He spent most of his time in the basement, from the moment he woke up until he went to sleep, as if hiding a secret from everyone. One day, he made a strange request to stay away from his room completely for 2 weeks. Although the request was odd, I accepted it, thinking he was just a private person. But what happened after those 2 weeks was a real disaster. Suddenly, the furniture in the house began to break on its own, and I started hearing terrifying and eerie sounds while sitting in the living room. Unable to stay in the house, I ran out to the garden and sat there, frozen with fear, unable to move. Shortly afterward, Mr. Mohammed came out of the house. He looked extremely frightened and ran straight toward me. Instinctively, I threw myself into his arms and began crying. Although I usually feared him due to his cold and strange demeanor, he surprised me this time. He was stroking my head and trying to calm me down, even though he was clearly terrified himself. He was breathing heavily and trembling with fear. When I finally calmed down a bit, he asked me what had happened. I told him everything I had seen and heard. He smiled at me strangely and said, "Don't worry, I promise this will be the last time you see and hear such things." But what happened next was completely unexpected. Suddenly, Mr. Mohammed began screaming and clutching his chest in pain. I was in shock and had no idea what to do. I felt something worse was about to happen, and soon enough, it did. Mr. Mohammed collapsed and died right in front of me. I couldn't do anything to save him. I stayed there, crying and screaming hysterically. Although the time I spent with him was short, those last moments were the hardest of all. However, I had grown attached to him, and now he was dead before my eyes. Days passed, and news of my master's death spread. After an autopsy, the doctor stated that the cause of death was a heart attack. But was it really a heart attack? Even if everyone believed that to be true, I could never accept it, especially after everything I had witnessed. Those strange events that unfolded before my eyes convinced me that the true cause of his death was entirely different from what the doctor described. I felt compelled to uncover the truth. After that, his uncle took me back to work for him at his house. A few days later, I asked for permission to leave the house, and he agreed. I immediately headed to Mohammed's house. Since the door was locked, I climbed over the wall to get in. It was 8 p.m. The first place I headed to was the basement, my master's favorite spot. The basement was vast but dark, eerie, and oppressive. It had an uncanny ability to evoke feelings of unease and gloom. I began searching through everything down there, hoping to find some clue. A peculiar box caught my attention, hidden away in a corner and covered with an old cloth. I removed the cloth to find a very old iron box. Unfortunately, it was locked, which only added to its mystery. I searched the entire basement for the key but couldn't find it. I left and headed to Mohammed's room. I had a strong feeling that the key would be there. Before I continue, there's something I forgot to mention. On the day Mohammed died, I had mustered up the courage to enter the house to fetch the phone and call his uncle. However, to my astonishment, all the broken furniture in the house had been restored as if nothing had happened. It felt like I was in a dream. That's when I became certain that my master wasn't the main reason behind his family's death. There was something far greater, something beyond the human realm. Returning to the topic at hand, I searched Mohammed's room for clues and the key. During my search, I came across something that piqued my curiosity, a large book with many pages titled The World of Jinn, Volume 2. I was puzzled by the presence of this book and wondered if it had anything to do with my master's death. I didn't dare to read it, but I skimmed through its pages. I was shocked by the strange drawings and symbols inside. They detailed ways to learn witchcraft and sorcery. Was he a sorcerer? While I pondered this, I noticed something shiny on the table. I approached it and found a large key. It was evident that it was old, as it was mostly covered in rust. I took the key and the book and returned to the basement. I used the key to open the box, only to discover a large number of books inside. These weren't ordinary books. They were all about Jinn. I emptied the box to check if anything else was inside. Among the contents, I found a collection of small tools, including chalks and incense sticks. I started examining them, feeling a mix of fear and intrigue. And 8 candles, along with a small box that caught my attention. I opened it out of curiosity and found it contained blood. I couldn't tell what creature the blood belonged to, but the smell was truly foul, so I quickly closed the box. On that day, I was certain and understood the true reason behind Mohammed's death and that of his family. It was the Jinn. From what I gathered, he must have become a sorcerer. However, I believe he must have defied them in some way, and this was their revenge. I took the box outside and placed all the books related to the Jinn inside it, then set it on fire. To my surprise, the flames turned black momentarily before returning to their natural color. The books burned to ashes, and with that, it was all over. I thought about informing his uncle about what had happened, but decided against it. If my master had wanted everyone to know his secret, he wouldn't have hidden those books. So, I chose to keep the secret to myself. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story. As always, if you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories.